There is a peculiar comfort we take in imagining evil as theatrical, lurking in shadows, announcing itself with a hiss and a cloak. We would much rather believe that our greatest dangers come dressed in obvious menace, because then we might feel clever for avoiding them. Yet the most destructive forces in a human life rarely arrive with thunder. They come softly. They come disguised as routine. They come in the very places where we stop paying attention, where the soul loosens its grip, where the mind goes idle and the heart goes unguarded. The ancient writers understood this far better than we do. They knew that corruption prefers the ordinary, not the dramatic, because the ordinary is where vigilance dies. So when I speak of witches and black magic, I am not asking you to hunt for villains in dark robes, or to tremble at shadows on the wall. I am asking you to consider a deeper truth, that there are patterns, habits, and environments that quietly work against the integrity of the soul, and they do so not through spectacle, but through familiarity. They enchant not by force, but by repetition. They do not attack your strength. They wait patiently for your fatigue. What if I told you that your greatest spiritual enemy is not hiding in some alley or abandoned building, but is at work in broad daylight, in places filled with people, in public facilities you use every single day, not because these places are evil in themselves, but because they are places where you stop being present, where your awareness shrinks, where your inner life is momentarily unattended? Modern enchantment has learned that its most devastating victories come not through obvious darkness, but through those ordinary moments when your moral and spiritual defenses are completely down. An old line from Scripture says that we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against unseen powers and patterns that shape the world. Read that wisely, and it becomes less a superstition and more a diagnosis. Our struggle is not primarily against people, but against ideas that hollow us out, habits that dull our conscience, and desires that quietly dethrone meaning and replace it with appetite. These are the true spells of our age. They do not turn men into frogs, they turn men into consumers. They do not curse crops, they curse attention. They do not bind the hands, they bind the will. Consider the first so-called place of attack, the public restroom. Strip away the superstition and you find a profound metaphor. It is a place of privacy in public, a place where the door closes and the world briefly disappears. It is where we are most alone among others, where dignity feels optional and attention collapses inward. In such moments, the soul is tempted to forget itself. Carelessness creeps in, the mind wanders, respect for one's own person diminishes. And here is the quiet danger. When you treat yourself as something disposable, the world will gladly agree with you. The erosion of self-respect is the beginning of many tragedies, including financial ones. A person who does not honor their own inner life will struggle to steward anything external, whether money, time, or responsibility. Wealth, in its truest sense, is not first a number, but a posture. It begins with the belief that what you carry within you matters enough to be guarded. If you cannot stand watch over your own thoughts in the smallest, most mundane moments, how will you stand watch over larger forces when temptation wears a tailored suit and speaks in reasonable tones? The loss of vigilance is the real contamination, not the environment itself. Then there is the image of the public water fountain, a symbol almost too perfect to ignore. Water has always represented life, sustenance, renewal. Yet how easily the source becomes taken for granted. We drink without tasting, we consume without gratitude. In modern life, we swallow ideas the same way we swallow water, quickly, habitually, without discernment. News, opinions, advertisements, ideologies, all flow past our lips daily. Some refresh, some poison slowly, not through drama, but through accumulation. A mind that does not choose its intake carefully will find its desires subtly altered. You begin to crave what does not satisfy and to neglect what does. This is how greed is born, not as a villainous hunger for gold, but as a quiet miseducation of desire. You are taught to want more rather than better, faster rather than deeper, visible success rather than invisible character. The spell is not cast by an outsider, it is accepted by the unwatchful drinker. True abundance, like clean water, restores rather than inflames. It leaves you clearer, not thirstier. The third image is the phone booth, an almost nostalgic symbol now, yet more relevant than ever. A device meant for connection, often filled with desperation, confession, fear, longing. Today we carry these booths in our pockets. Our phones hum with the emotional residue of countless conversations, comparisons, and anxieties. They are conduits not of magic, but of influence. Through them pass the voices that tell you who you should be, what you should want, and how far behind you are. Here, the danger is not communication, but constant exposure without reflection. When every quiet moment is filled with noise, the soul loses its ability to speak. And when the soul cannot speak, it cannot correct the lies it hears. You begin to believe that wealth is worth more than wisdom, that appearance outranks substance, that speed is superior to patience. These are not merely errors of thought, they are moral distortions. They reshape how you measure a life. The result is a peculiar poverty in the midst of plenty. A man with resources and no peace. A woman with options and no direction. The laundromat, our fourth symbol, offers another lesson. It is a place where we attempt to make things clean again, where what has been worn and soiled is given a chance at renewal. Yet notice how easily we outsource this work. We place our garments in machines and walk away, trusting the process without involvement. This is precisely how many approach inner renewal. They want transformation without participation, cleansing without confession, improvement without effort. Moral growth, like true cleanliness, requires engagement. It requires choosing what to keep and what to discard. If you throw everything into the same cycle, the stains remain. A life that refuses to examine its habits will carry its dirt forward, no matter how many external rituals it performs. Wealth, when pursued without inner order, becomes another layer of fabric hiding the same old marks. But when character is laundered with intention, even modest means can feel rich, because nothing is wasted on hiding what you have refused to heal. Finally, there is the bus stop, the crossroads, a place of waiting, of transition, of movement not yet begun. These are the moments when we are most susceptible to influence, because we are between decisions. We are no longer where we were, but not yet where we are going. In such spaces, impatience whispers, comparison sharpens its teeth. You watch others arrive, depart, succeed, fail. You begin to question your own timing. Here, the greatest danger is surrendering purpose to urgency. You start moving simply to escape stillness. You make financial decisions to avoid discomfort rather than to honor conviction. You chase opportunity instead of calling. The spell at the crossroads is not malevolent. It is hurried. It tells you that waiting is weakness and that speed is proof of worth. Yet nearly every lasting good in a human life grows slowly, underground, unseen. To despise waiting is to despise formation. Across all these images runs a single thread. The true battleground is attention. Where attention goes, life follows. The modern world is not conspiring to destroy you in secret chambers. It is inviting you to forget yourself in public ones. And forgetfulness is the oldest trick of all. A man who forgets who he is will sell himself cheaply. A woman who forgets what she values will trade it for applause. This is how money becomes a master rather than a tool. How success becomes a tyrant rather than a servant. Spiritual authority, then, is not about dominance but about presence. It is the quiet strength of carrying meaning into every room you enter, of refusing to become smaller than your circumstances. When you move through the world awake, ordinary places lose their power to dull you. You do not need to avoid life, you need to inhabit it fully. Gratitude becomes a shield. Discipline becomes a compass. Humility becomes a kind of wealth that cannot be stolen. There is a profound irony here. The more you chase money as meaning, the poorer you become, because meaning cannot be owned. But when you pursue meaning first, money often finds its proper place. No longer a god to be served, but a resource to be stewarded. The truly prosperous life is not enchanted, it is aligned. Its power comes not from rituals or defenses, but from coherence between belief and action. In the end, the greatest revelation is this: nothing external has ultimate authority over a life that is internally ordered. No environment can corrupt a conscience that is awake. No influence can enslave a will that knows its purpose. The light you carry is not fragile. It does not flicker at every shadow. It transforms the space it enters, not by force, but by clarity. And so the final awakening is not fear, but responsibility. To realize that the world is full of subtle pressures is not a call to paranoia, but to maturity. You are not a victim wandering through traps. You are a steward walking through opportunities to practice presence, integrity, and wisdom. Every ordinary place becomes extraordinary when inhabited by a person who knows why they are alive. This is the true abundance. To move through life unenchanted by its illusions, uncorrupted by its noise, and unafraid of its shadows, because you have learned that the greatest magic was never cast upon you at all. It was always the quiet power of attention, choice, and meaning, waiting for you to claim it. And once you see this, once the veil lifts even slightly, you begin to notice how often your life has been shaped not by great moral failures, but by small abdications of attention. You did not lose your way in a single dramatic moment. You drifted. You drifted when you stopped asking why you were doing what you were doing. You drifted when convenience replaced conviction, when speed replaced care, when you allowed your inner life to be managed by external demands. Drift is the most effective enchantment of all, because it feels like rest. It feels harmless. It feels earned. And yet, drift carries you wherever the current happens to be flowing, not where your soul was meant to arrive. This is why inner transformation must precede outer success. A person who has not learned to govern their thoughts will eventually be governed by their circumstances. A person who has not disciplined their desires will mistake every impulse for destiny. We speak often of freedom, but freedom is not the absence of restraint. It is the presence of mastery. The truly free person is not the one who can do anything, but the one who does not have to do everything they want. This kind of freedom cannot be bought, and yet it determines how money behaves once it enters your life. In untrained hands, wealth amplifies chaos. In disciplined hands, it becomes quiet, purposeful, almost modest in its power. There is a temptation, especially in an age obsessed with optimization, to treat the soul as a problem to be solved rather than a life to be lived. We search for techniques, formulas, shortcuts, but the deepest changes rarely come through force. They come through alignment. When belief, habit, and action point in the same direction, life gains momentum without strain. You stop fighting yourself. You stop needing constant motivation because meaning itself pulls you forward. Gratitude plays a peculiar role here. It is often misunderstood as mere politeness or positive thinking, but in truth it is a form of spiritual realism. To be grateful is to see clearly what is already present, rather than hallucinating about what is missing. A grateful person is difficult to manipulate, because their sense of worth is not easily destabilized. They do not need to prove their value through excess. They do not need to accumulate symbols of success to reassure themselves that they matter. This does not make them passive. It makes them dangerous in the best possible way. They can pursue excellence without being enslaved by envy. Redemption, in this context, is not about erasing the past, but about reinterpreting it. Every misstep becomes material for wisdom. Every season of lack becomes training in discernment. The very places where you once drifted can become anchors if you choose to inhabit them differently. The public spaces, the ordinary routines, the daily transactions of time and money all become arenas for integrity rather than ambushes for the unwary. You begin to realize that nothing in your life is spiritually neutral. Everything either sharpens you or dulls you, and the difference lies in how consciously you engage with it. Purpose, then, is not something you find by wandering endlessly. It is something you recognize by paying attention to what consistently asks the best of you. It is revealed not in grand visions, but in repeated invitations to choose depth over distraction, truth over convenience, stewardship over indulgence. When purpose is clear, wealth becomes a means rather than a measure. You stop asking, how much can I get? And start asking, what is this for? That single question has the power to break more spells than any ritual ever could. And so the great irony resolves itself. The world warns you about hidden enemies and secret dangers, but the real work is visible, practical, and profoundly ordinary. It is done in how you think when no one is watching, how you spend when no one is impressed, how you wait when no one is applauding. This is where moral strength is forged, quietly, patiently, without spectacle. This is where abundance is redefined, not as overflow without meaning, but as sufficiency aligned with purpose. When you live this way, fear loses its leverage. You no longer need to imagine threats lurking in every corner, because you have learned to stand firmly in your own life. You carry coherence with you, and coherence is a form of light. It does not shout, it does not accuse, it simply reveals what is real, and in that revelation, false powers fade. The awakening, when it comes, is not explosive, it is steady. It feels like waking up to yourself after a long sleep. You realize that you were never truly trapped, only inattentive, that the greatest protection was never avoidance, but presence, that the deepest wealth was never external, but the quiet, unshakable knowledge of who you are and why you are here. And once that knowledge takes root, no ordinary place can diminish you, because everywhere you go, you bring meaning with you. And from that realization comes a gentler, sterner responsibility. You can no longer pretend ignorance. Once you have seen how life truly shapes a soul, you cannot go back to blaming shadows for what neglect has done. You begin to understand that most of what we call misfortune is not punishment, but consequence, patiently waiting for recognition. This is not said to condemn you, but to restore your dignity. Consequence means your choices matter. It means you are not a leaf blown about by unseen hands, but a moral agent whose daily decisions accumulate into destiny. This is why the inner life must be guarded not with anxiety, but with reverence. Reverence is the posture of someone who knows they are carrying something valuable. You do not fling a priceless object carelessly from hand to hand. You move with intention. In the same way, when you realize that your attention, your conscience, and your capacity to choose are sacred trusts, you stop squandering them on what merely entertains or distracts. You begin to ask harder questions of your habits. Does this strengthen me or merely soothe me? Does this expense serve my calling or merely my impatience? Does this thought lead me toward clarity or away from it? Money, viewed through this lens, loses its mystical terror. It is no longer an idol to fear, nor a savior to worship. It becomes what it always was meant to be, concentrated potential. In the hands of a confused person, potential becomes volatility. In the hands of a grounded person, it becomes leverage for good. This is why two people can earn the same amount and live entirely different lives. One is anxious, restless, perpetually chasing the next proof of worth. The other is calm, deliberate, quietly effective. The difference is not intelligence or luck. It is orientation. One serves money as a master, the other assigns it a task. And here, the modern world offers its most seductive lie. that your value must be demonstrated constantly, publicly, and immediately. This lie feeds on comparison, because comparison is the fastest way to make you forget your own measure. When you live by borrowed standards, you will always feel behind, no matter how far you go. The antidote is not isolation, but rootedness. To know what you stand for so clearly that the noise of other lives becomes background rather than instruction. Rooted people are not unambitious. They are selective. They invest their energy where it compounds, not where it merely sparkles. There is a kind of quiet courage required for this life. It is the courage to be misunderstood, to move slowly in a culture addicted to speed, to choose quality over quantity when quantity is more easily praised. This courage does not announce itself. It shows up in budgets that reflect values, in schedules that leave room for thought, in relationships that are chosen rather than collected. Over time, these choices create a gravity. Others begin to feel steadier in your presence, though they may not know why. This is not charisma, it is coherence, and coherence is persuasive without trying to be. You begin to see that the so-called battlegrounds of everyday life were never meant to frighten you, but to train you. Each ordinary interaction is a rehearsal for larger responsibilities. Each small discipline strengthens the muscles required for greater stewardship. Nothing is wasted in a life lived awake. Even frustration becomes a teacher, revealing where expectation has outrun preparation or desire has outrun wisdom. When you stop resenting these lessons, they stop feeling like a tax and start feeling like guidance. And then, almost imperceptibly, fear loosens its grip, not because the world has become safer, but because you have become sturdier. You trust yourself more, not in arrogance, but in practiced faithfulness. You have seen what happens when you keep your word, when you tell the truth, when you resist the easy compromise. You have evidence now, not theory. Your life begins to argue on your behalf. This is the kind of confidence that cannot be shaken by market fluctuations or public opinion, because it was never built on either. In this state, abundance reveals its final meaning. It is not excess. It is enoughness paired with purpose. It is having what you need to do, what you are called to do, and the wisdom to stop there when stopping is required. This kind of abundance is strangely generous. It spills over not because it is desperate to display itself, but because it has nowhere else to go. It funds what matters. It feeds what lasts. It supports beauty, truth, and restoration without needing applause. So the awakening completes its circle. You realize that nothing external was ever conspiring against you in secret places. The real struggle was always for your attention, your allegiance, your sense of meaning. And once those are claimed by something solid, something true, the ordinary world loses its power to ensnare you. Public places become neutral again. Daily routines become sacred again. Life itself becomes coherent. You stand finally, not as someone perpetually defending against imagined threats, but as someone actively building a life of weight and clarity. You are no longer enchanted by fear, nor seduced by glittering distractions. You have learned the older, harder, better magic of moral strength, to choose well when no one is watching, to honor meaning over money, and to live in such a way that wherever you go, the light you carry quietly changes the atmosphere. And once you reach that point, something subtle but irreversible occurs. You stop asking the world for permission to be whole. You no longer wait for circumstances to align before you align yourself. The hunger that once drove you outward in frantic search turns inward and becomes discernment. You realize that much of what you once called ambition was simply anxiety wearing respectable clothing. It wanted reassurance, not responsibility. It wanted proof, not purpose. And now that anxiety has lost its authority, because you have discovered a deeper source of assurance that does not fluctuate with applause or income. This is where moral strength stops being an abstract ideal and becomes a lived reality. You notice it first in restraint. In the moment you could exaggerate but choose accuracy. In the purchase, you could justify but decide to delay. In the argument, you could win but choose to soften. These moments rarely feel heroic, yet they accumulate into a character that is difficult to corrupt. Evil, in its most practical sense, feeds on impatience and ego. When those are starved, it has very little to work with. You begin to sense how deeply the modern world profits from keeping people spiritually tired. Exhausted people are easier to persuade, easier to sell to, easier to lead by appetite rather than by reason. Fatigue dulls conscience. Overstimulation replaces reflection. And in that haze, even intelligent people begin to confuse movement with progress and noise with meaning. To reclaim your inner life, then, is not an escape from reality, but an act of resistance. It is a refusal to let your soul be strip-mined for attention and impulse. Wealth, seen clearly, becomes one of the most revealing teachers in this resistance. It exposes what you trust. If money increases your generosity, it was never your God. If it increases your fear, it may have been. If it sharpens your clarity, it has found its proper place. If it magnifies your vanity, it has found yours. This is why the moral work must always precede the material one. Money does not change people. It unmasks them. It turns the volume up on whatever voice was already leading the heart. And here perhaps lies the final deception of the age, the belief that meaning will arrive later, once conditions improve, once the account is larger, once the schedule is freer, once recognition is secured. This postponement is itself a kind of spell. It convinces you to live half a life now in exchange for a promised fullness that never quite arrives. But meaning is not a reward at the end of the road. It is the way you walk it. It is available in the present moment, or it is not available at all. Those who grasp this do not withdraw from the world. They engage it more deeply. They work hard, but not frantically. They earn, but not desperately. They give, but not performatively. Their lives develop a certain density, a seriousness without heaviness. They can enjoy success without being possessed by it, and endure lack without being defined by it. This balance is not accidental. It is the fruit of countless small choices to place truth above comfort and purpose above impulse. And so the imagery that once frightened loses its grip entirely. The ordinary places, the daily intersections, the public routines no longer feel like ambushes because you are no longer asleep within them. Awareness has replaced superstition. Responsibility has replaced fear. You understand now that the greatest danger was never external contamination, but internal neglect. And having corrected that, you walk with a steadiness that does not need constant reassurance. This is the quiet epiphany at the heart of it all, that a well-ordered soul is a sanctuary. Nothing enters without being examined. Nothing leaves without intention. Such a soul does not need to shout its beliefs, because they are evident in its posture, its patience, its priorities. It becomes, in a world of restless striving, a living contradiction, proof that another way of being is possible. And when you live this way long enough, others begin to notice. Not because you advertise it, but because peace has a texture, integrity has a weight, meaning has a gravity that draws the weary and unsettles the hollow. You become, without trying, a signpost, not pointing to yourself, but to the possibility that life can be lived without enchantment by fear or enslavement to appetite. This is the awakening that matters. Not the discovery of hidden enemies, but the recovery of inner authority, not the avoidance of imagined curses, but the cultivation of moral clarity. When money finds you here, it serves. When hardship finds you here, it teaches. When uncertainty finds you here, it does not own you. You stand, finally, awake in the daylight, unafraid of ordinary places, untroubled by invisible threats, because you have learned the oldest and truest defense: to live with intention, to think with honesty, and to anchor your worth in something deeper than wealth. And in doing so, you discover that the life you were protecting yourself for is already unfolding beneath your feet, rich with meaning, resilient against illusion, and quietly radiant with purpose.